Chapter 13. March 3rd, 2160. 2149 Set, Citadel, Presidium. The texture of the fish I was eating held a certain crunchiness that was different from what I was used to, but not necessarily bad, just like the flavored water I had, which tasted a bit like lemons. While taking a sip of my water, I let my view wander over the other people in the room. 20 people were in the main room of the residence we had rented, me included. Around half of them were like me, members of the Alliance government. The rest were soldiers here to protect us. This time, there were only 2 in 7 soldiers. One of them would act as my bodyguard while the other coordinated the rest of the Marines. It had been decided that sending enough N7 to guard all officials in the residence would be a waste of resources. And while there were plans to create a division inside the AIS responsible for all kinds of personal security, they were still in the planning phase. But it wasn't the soldiers who held my attention. My focus was on the other officials. 6 men and women, each with their own aide or secretary, were sent with me to the Citadel. Everyone had their own task, and as far as I knew, they were doing their jobs well. Be it the acquiring of goods like standard Omni tools, the gathering of information, or the negotiation of minor deals, everyone gave their best effort to support and strengthen the Alliance. The most surprising, at least to me, was how they all looked to me for advice and leadership. For example, Denise Treadwalk asked me how to best approach the talks concerning access to the extranet and connecting our communications network with that of the Citadel. I had advised her to concentrate on the fact that a stable communication network between the Alliance and the rest of the Citadel would work in favor of both sides. Furthermore, she should decline any pre-made communication beacons and instead get the blueprints, since we could not be sure if they had additional functions or not. The temptation to spy on our communication could be too great to resist. Even the blueprints would end up more as a reference than an instruction. Our combos were like those of the Citadel based on Prothean tech, so upgrading them to Citadel standard would not be difficult. Denise Treadwalk wasn't the only one that came to me for advice. Over the course of the week, I had given tips or discussed topics with the others as well. At first, I didn't understand why and thought it was because I had been to the Citadel before. But that hadn't been the reason. Those that hadn't been long with the Alliance came to me because I was, as they said, a member of the first hour, something that wasn't completely correct since I joined the Alliance almost 2 years after its founding. But it sounded good, so I let it stand. The other officials had a different reason. They had been part of the Alliance almost as long as I had been, or in the case of Terrence Roxon, even longer. Their reason to discuss their tasks with me was that I was part of the inner circle of the Alliance, as they called it. I thought it a fitting name for the group Michael had assembled around him, and I felt proud to belong to such a selected group. Nonetheless, I did my best to help each of them, finding it no more difficult than managing my businesses. Just as Anita had said during our last visit to the Citadel, the worlds of politics and business were more alike than most people thought. Only the stakes were higher. The lives of billions depended on our decisions, and the more information we had, the easier it would be to make the right choices. And thinking about gathering information made me call out for Terrence's attention. "Terrence," I called, and the older gentleman of 60 years turned his head towards me. His face showed the signs of hard work and age, and the gray in his hair and beard did not make him seem younger, but his blue eyes of their best to dissuade anybody from thinking him frail. They shined with a youthful light, knowledge, and intelligence apparent in them. He was a man who came from simple circumstances and had worked hard to get to where he was now. His ambition was like a fire, driving him to do his best, but never to the detriment of others. While some would use their ambition to claw their way to the top, no matter the cost, Terrence used his to the advantage of his fellows. He told me once that his goal had been no more than to get a good job and to have a family, and when he achieved it, he just looked for a new one. I've had seen many of the no matter the cost people, destroyed a few of them as well, so I knew that Terrence wasn't one of them. That was the reason I had asked him to gather information on possible trade deals for the Alliance. "Yes, Mr. Denebrin, how can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and a bit grating from his smoking habit. "Did everything go well with the last transaction?" Terrence nodded and said, "Yes, everything went well. I sold the EZO, and everyone who requires funds can access them. Interestingly, the Volus I dealt with was more open to haggling than the Turian from the last time, so the deal we got was better than before. Still, I had to promise him to recommend his company to people inside the Alliance. That doesn't surprise me. The Volus are seen as shrewd businessmen. He has probably seen the advantage of a favorable first impression on a new species and wants his name known before anyone else. Wouldn't have done anything differently, I commented. The Ezo Terrence spoke of was something we had brought to the Citadel as a means to pay for our lodging, food, and the goods we wanted to ship back to Alliance territory. One thing that made me curious, though, was the fact that Terrence said that the Volus merchant had been more open to negotiations about the price for the Ezo than the Turian one. It didn't mean that the Turian merchant did not negotiate. He had, in fact, just that the Volus did so more readily. Over the last week, I used my access to the extranet to research everything that could become helpful in tomorrow's negotiations. And there was one thing that I took note of. Namely, everyone showed characteristics of their species, no matter their birthplace. An Asari born on Thessia was different from one born on Ilium, yet both showed similar characteristics. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case with one born out in the Terminus systems as well. Until Terrence remembered me of it, I had banished it from my mind. I called for my personal aid with a quick gesture, and he was by my side almost instantly. "What can I do for you, Mr. Dennebrun?" asked Mike Barnes respectfully. Mike Barnes was a young man of 25 years with sandy blonde hair and brown eyes. He hadn't been in my employment for more than 3 months, but proved himself to be invaluable already. Naturally, he had been checked by the AIS for any inconsistencies. It didn't matter which task I gave him, he always got them done quickly and efficiently with nothing to complain about. Sometimes I felt like he was more like a butler with the tasks I gave him than the aide or secretary he was, but when I told him so, he had laughed and said that I paid enough that he didn't mind. "Please get into contact with Director Clark when we get back to Alliance space," I said, and I could already see how Mike had his PDA in his hand, ready to write down the message. I would like an AIS analyst to compile a list of professors and doctors in the field of history, art, sociology, anything that has even distantly to do with culture. That's all. Of course, Mr. Dennebrun. I will get into contact with Director Clark's secretary as soon as possible. While it was no secret that Andrew and I met occasionally, we had decided to keep our friendship to ourselves, else there would be people who would become nervous, and that was something that had to be prevented. "If I may ask, why are you asking for that list, Mr. Dennebrun?" asked Denise Treadwalk. She was one of the rather new members of the Alliance. She had been part of the infrastructure branch of the Alliance for only a year, but had been promoted to head the communications division due to her prior work in the private sector. Her doctorate in telecommunications helped with that. "I want to know how the individual societies of the Citadel came to be. If we know their origins, it will help us understand how they think," I answered. "And why are professors of art included in that list?" she asked further, while playing with a strand of her brown hair that came free of her strict hairdo. "Art is an expression of oneself," I answered with a smile. "If we look, for example, at how the Asari expressed themselves 1,000 years ago and put it into contrast with how they do today, that can give us a clue on how they think." "Mr. Dennebrun is right, Miss Treadwalk," said Terrence. He had followed our short exchange with interest and had nodded in agreement to what I had said. To know one's origin in their life until now is the first step in predicting how someone would react. And it works for individuals too. But perhaps, Mr. Dennebrun, you should include religious experts as well. Faith and belief have played an important role in the development of human society. And as far as I know, the other species, the Asari and Turians especially, have religions as well. It could be interesting to see how much they influence their thinking. Terrence was making a good point I hadn't considered. With a side glance, I could see how Mike put his PDA away, and he gave me a nod when he noticed me looking at him, signaling that he had added religious experts to the list already. When I turned my attention back to Terrence and Denise, I saw them engaged in a discussion about how culture influenced people and decided to participate in it. While I would have loved to discuss the topic some more with them, a look at my watch showed me that it was already time for me to go to bed. Tomorrow's negotiations were quite early for Citadel standards, and they were not something I wanted to attend even a bit tired. Depending on the terms negotiated, our economy could either crash for a time or be allowed to grow strong enough to not get swept away by the other galactic powers. I'm sorry, but I will have to excuse myself, Miss Treadwalk, Mr. Roxon. I need my sleep. Tomorrow will be an exhausting day, I said. Terrence just waved my apology off and said, "It's no problem, Mr. Dennebrun. We will have enough opportunities to continue our discussion in the next few days. After all, we'll stay on the Citadel for another week." I just smiled at his words and proceeded to wish the people remaining in the room a good night. The way to my room was thankfully short, and after I finished undressing and washing, I fell into my bed and slept like a stone in minutes. March 4th, 2160. 9:47 set. Citadel, Presidium. While I appeared outwardly calm, the inside was a whole other story. I had known from the beginning that my negotiation partner could be arrogant and look down on my species for being relatively young, but this was getting ridiculous. A power play was something I had expected. I would have done the same if I had been in their position. After all, it was the alliance that would gain more in the long run from joining the galactic economy. Nonetheless, I had also expected more subtlety from them. Coming late to a meeting was fine, so long it wasn't more than 10 minutes. But to keep someone waiting for more than half an hour, well, saying to my face that I was nothing more than a primate would have worked just as well. I took a deep breath and focused my mind on the information I had gathered via the extranet. There was no doubt that the STG monitored all extranet activities of our delegation, but I had instructed everyone to limit their research via the extranet to history, music, laws, and so on. To the STG, it would seem like we were trying to learn more about the galaxy, which wasn't wrong per se, but everything we learned about them could help us in myriad ways. For me, it had been the fact that the economy of the Elcor crashed the moment their market opened to foreign interests. When I read about the details, I couldn't help but laugh. One day they were two markets, the next they were one. No limitations to foreign investors, no time to let the markets adapt to each other. Was it any surprise that most of their companies were bought up by foreign investors in the blink of an eye? The disparity between the financial power between the two markets had been as big as the technological difference between the Neanderthals and the Reapers. All right, that was an extreme example, but it made clear what I was trying to say. In the economic circles, they called it the crash of the courts. There were many papers written about it, discussing what went wrong and what could have been done better. And I had done my best to read as many as possible before today to perhaps use them in the negotiations. Asari, Turian, Salarian. Hell, I've even read one from a Batarian about it. Still, the more I read about the crash of the courts, the more I was convinced that there had been a plan behind it. Nobody would have been that much of an idiot to let that happen. The markets of the Citadel didn't come out of it unscathed either, stocks falling through the whole of Citadel space. The repercussions had been felt for another 100 years, and only then had the stocks risen to the level from before the crash. In the end, I found the answer when I looked at who owned most of the businesses that were in Elcor space. 79% of all companies had Asari shareholders, and 32% even had Asari as majority shareholders. If I had looked deeper, I would have probably found that they were all connected to an Asari matriarch, and those matriarchs probably knew each other as well. Is there a better way to control someone than to hold their economy hostage? For that reason alone, I had to make sure that our economy could grow strong enough fast so that when the inevitable crash came, and it would come, there was no doubt it would just become a minor inconvenience. Just as I had finished organizing my thoughts and calmed down enough to not let my anger get the better of me, the door to the meeting room opened, and an Asari in a flowing dress entered with a Volus just a step behind her. She smiled as she saw me, and I had to stop myself from cringing. If she thought her smile looked genuine, then she was quite the fool. While the smile itself looked almost sincere, the look in her eyes destroyed the picture, revealing the fakeness and contempt in them. The Volus, on the other hand, revealed nothing, his envirosuit helping him in this regard. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Dennebrun. Another matter needed our attention," the Asari said sweetly, and raised her hand with a movement that was supposed to look elegant. But to me, it looked desperate for attention. I took her and shook it a sincere smile on my face, and hopefully it didn't seem as faked as hers. Whenever I had to deal with people like her, I thought back to the time when I went camping with my father. The happiness of the memory helped me to hide the contempt I had for people like her. I understand, I answered, trying to not let the rest of my anger at her influence my tone. It is good to meet you, miss. Averill, Lenore Averill, Mr. Denebrin, and that is Val Dosk. She gestured to the Volus beside her, her tone changing a bit when she mentioned him. I had, of course, tried to find out who would lead the negotiations concerning the opening of markets, but the best I could do was narrow them down to one of the three council species. That a Volus would lead the talks concerning the currency issue was a given. Every time a new species joined the Citadel, it had been them that would do so. "Greeting, Earth Clan," said Dosk. The typical sound of his rebreathers accompanied his words. "To you as well, Mr. Dosk," I answered and took the offered hand. "Perhaps we should sit and start the meeting. Enough time has already been wasted," said Averill as if it hadn't been her fault. I went back to the place I had been sitting in while I waited, taking a moment to remember what I had found out about Lenore Averill. Born on Thessia, matron, her mother, a matriarch, died 70 years ago. Got her job shortly after her mother became one. Rose slowly through the ranks but hasn't been promoted since her mother died. It spoke of a woman that got to her position thanks to nepotism, but was clever enough to hold it without help. There wasn't much more that I could find, just a few rumors in online forums, speaking of her as an Asari Sevya. It had taken me a few hours to find out what Sevya meant. Apparently, it was a word from an old Thessian dialect that meant something like superior or above the others. Today it was a label for Asari that thought of their species as above the other galactic civilizations. In other words, she was a racist, or better said, a speciest. While I never believed rumors that I read about online, the way she acted towards Dasadik gave credit to them. It would certainly explain why she stretched the waiting period out so much, wanting to show the lesser species who was on top. When everyone was sitting at the conference table, Averill nodded once and started to talk. "As far as I understand, the Alliance wishes to open their markets to Citadel investors." "That is true, Miss Averill," I replied. "Many people of the Citadel wish the same, Mr. Denebrin. That's why I'm here today. Val Dosk will just be an observer during our talks, and when we are finished, he will talk with you about the process to replace your currency with the galactic credit." I tried to keep any emotion off my face when she talked. Her voice may have sounded pleasant if it wasn't for the undertones that almost dripped with arrogance. The fact that she talked with such surety about replacing our currency as if it was a foregone conclusion rankled me. "The necessary contracts have been sent to you, if I'm correct," she continued without giving me a chance to reply. "That is correct, too. Then the only thing that is needed is your signature as a representative of your government." With that, she slid a datapad across the table, and I took it to read it over. The contract was the same as the one I acquired almost a year ago during the last time I visited the Citadel. The Citadel had a lot more experience with opening two completely different economies to each other than humanity, so it would have been stupid to ignore it. Most of the things written in the contract were pretty standard, nothing that would be out of place if it had been two nations on Earth instead. The only problem was that the financial power of the other species would overpower us in a matter of months if they were given leave to invest in our economy unchecked. I sighed dramatically and put the datapad back down on the table. My eyes found those of Averill, and I tried my best to look apologetic when I said, "I'm sorry, Miss Averill, but my government can't accept the contract as it is." The smile she constantly wore on her face froze for a moment before she asked, "And what point exactly does your government have to reject the contract?" Paragraph 37, Section 3B, the opening of the stock market to foreign investors. As far as we know, it was this that led to the crush of the courts, as you call it, didn't it? The crash was unpreventable. The economy of the Elcor was growing too slow. Even if we had waited for 100 years, it would have still happened, Averill answered, the bite in her tone concealed but not well enough. That's true, Dr. Welk wrote the same in his book. But he also said that if the Elcor had been given 30 to 40 years, the repercussions on the Elcor and the Citadel wouldn't have been that great. Have you read his work? Of course, the Solarian makes some good points. but there are also enough works that disprove his position. I didn't have enough time to read them all, but I do understand your point. Still, I think the idea of regulated investment would be more practical than other means. Matriarch Levara writes about that possibility in her follow-up work to Dr. Welk's thesis. As far as I know, she's currently teaching at Ceres University. The moment I mentioned the matriarch, I knew I would get what I want. Avell's eyes widened faintly at the matriarch's name and her position. It was one thing to dismiss the paper of a Solarian, but something completely different to do the same to an Asari matriarch, especially with Val Dosk as a witness. If it got back to the matriarch that a matron dismissed her paper, there would be probably hell to pay. If you want, I can show you her thesis. I believe I have it on my datapad, I said, hammering it home that she had a choice to make. With a quick side glance, I checked if Val Dosk wanted to add something to the discussion, but he just sat there, patiently waiting for his turn to come. Due to his envirosuit, I couldn't gauge any reaction from him. He was like a statue. "What is your counteroffer?" asked Averill finally, coming to a decision. I could feel my smile becoming more genuine as I slid my own datapad across the table and said, "For a time period of 20 years, the maximum of stocks available for foreign investors is 10% of any company open to the stock market." With that opening, the discussions began. It took almost 2 hours to come to an agreement and change the contents of the contract accordingly. But in the end, I got what I wanted as a minimum. The data I prepared beforehand to show that anything under 10 years of controlled investment could lead to devastating results for the human economy proved itself invaluable. To go below that would suggest that the Citadel and the Council had an interest in crippling the economy of a species, something that their own citizens wouldn't take well, especially with the picture of galactic cooperation and peace the Council wanted to show. In the end, the agreement was that for the next 12 years, the maximum of stocks that could be sold to investors outside of Alliance territory was restricted to 18%. The moment Averill and I signed the updated contract, she bid farewell to Dosk and me and practically stormed out of the conference room. I was about to relax in my chair, pleased with my work so far, when Dosk spoke. "Well played, Earth Clan." For a moment, I was surprised that the Volus was still in the room. He had been quiet the whole time during my negotiation with Averill, and I had completely forgotten that he was there as well. "What do you mean, Mr. Dosk?" I asked, trying to sound innocent. If it affected the Volus in any way, I couldn't say, the envirosuit masking all emotions he may have had. It wouldn't surprise me if they were part of the reason why Volus were such good businessmen. "I know of the paper that Matriarch Levara wrote. It's quite old. I believe she wrote it at the beginning of her matron phase, still more maiden than matron back then. And ever since she entered the later years of her matron phase, she never lost any word about it again." "I didn't know that, Volclan," I answered with a smile that was as fake as the one Averill had on her face. I must have done something right because Dosk suddenly sat a bit straighter on his chair and nodded at me. "It doesn't matter anyway anymore. The contract is signed, and as Miss Averill said to me before the meeting, this was her responsibility, and I should concentrate on mine. And I also think the stability that comes with this deal is better. My people were quite annoyed during and after the crush. Still, I believe there will be an open position in the future, especially when it is noticed that she made a beginner mistake." "And what mistake are you speaking of?" "That she didn't check what kind of years you spoke of." Dosk's comment brought a smile back to my face. He was right. She didn't ask what kind of year I was talking about, too absorbed in her belief that everything was adjusted to the Citadel standard and thus the Asari standard. She didn't take into account that a standard Citadel year was around 1.2 years on Earth, the time measurement I was talking about. That meant the 12 years in the contract were equivalent to 14.4 years on Earth. 4 more years than we needed to strengthen our economy against the worst repercussions. "Well," said Dosk, "concerning the exchange rate between your currency and the galactic credit, I think we should use EZO as the base, don't you think? Do you have any data on the supply and demand in Citadel space? It would do us no good if the numbers are too different." "Of course," he said and put a datapad on the table. "I also took the liberty to compare our units of weight to each other. There are only minor differences, but they could be important later." I hummed, pleased at Dosk's forethought. We should also take other precious minerals into account. Gold and platinum, for example. A good idea, Earth Clan, said Dosk. Chapter 14. May 15, 2162. 1529 set, Arcturus Station. I sighed, dropping my datapad on my desk and rubbing my eyes with the back of my hand. Paperwork was really the bane of all creation. Nothing could be more boring than looked through mountains of monotonous reports and proposals. I turned my chair around to look at the wall behind me. It had been one of my guilty pleasures to make the wall look like a giant window, the Arcturus system, and the stars beyond it proudly displayed for all to see. The view always helped me relax, the irritation of doing absolutely tedious work flowing away. Not for the first time, I wished I had a drink in my hand and had nothing more to do than to watch the stars. But drinking made you sloppy, and sloppy wasn't something I wanted to be associated with my work. A sigh left me again. It had been more than 2 years since I had risen to the position of Minister of Economy, 3 years since the attack on Shanxi, and the galaxy was surprisingly notable events happened during the last 2 years that could change the current political climate. Most people were happy about that. The fear that once hung over our heads that war could come was gone now, and people were ready to meet their new neighbors. The economy had taken a dip after the stock market opened to Citadel investors, but it was already rising again. I snorted, remembering my last visit to the Citadel that happened 8 months ago. When I was there, I met with Val Dosk to go over the currency exchange numbers to check if the rates were stable or needed adjustment. He told me that the Asari I negotiated with had been recalled to Thessia for urgent business, and after a while he got the message that she retired from her position due to personal reasons. While discussing the exchange rates, Dosk and I also made a trading deal concerning luxury goods. He told me he had connections to various people that were interested in buying items that were uniquely produced inside the human territory. They had the necessary trading network in place already and could start immediately with the distribution of the goods, even into the terminus systems if there was a demand for it. It was a good deal since the number of trading ships that were allowed to enter Citadel space was heavily restricted. Not even 2 months later, and I had talked to dozens of company representatives, bringing them on board, creating proposals for the Parliament, and trying to relax the entry into the Shanxi system for merchant vessels. Shanxi was our gateway into Citadel space, and it was growing to be one of our most developed colonies. The damages from the First Contact War were removed and repaired, and the colony looked better than ever. The additional income from taxes during the last few months was a great help in growing the capital and its defenses. In my opinion, the only planets better defended than Shanxi were Earth and Reach, our homeworld and military capital, respectively. Even if the Citadel fleet just beyond the Shanxi relay jumped into the system, the defenses could hold until the closest fleet arrived for support. Not that it would take long. Admiral Wright had decided that one fleet was always patrolling the territory close to the Shanxi system, not close enough to worry the Council about an attack, but close enough to respond to any kind of crisis. Thinking about the Citadel fleet beyond the gate, I could only roll my eyes in annoyance. In the 2 years since the meeting and agreement with the Citadel Council, only a fifth of the Turian ships had been replaced with Asari and Salarian ships. Dragging their feet was an apt description for it. The Turian ships would be replaced one at a time, and only when a Salarian or Asari ship arrived to take their place, something that could take months in between. The official reason was the Asari and Salarian couldn't just take more than one ship from on their patrol duties, else it would leave gaps in their security net. Nobody believed that reason, but we didn't call them out on it either. The most important thing was that they wouldn't assemble more ships on the other side of the relay. Furthermore, sending one ship at a time was a lot safer for us than a whole fleet just arriving and saying that they were there to replace the Turian ships. If that happens now, we will know that there is something else going on. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door to my office, and I turned back on my chair towards my desk and called, "Enter." The door opened sideways with a hiss, and my assistant, Mike Barnes, entered. He walked in with his eyes glued to the data pad in his right hand while holding 3 or 4 in his left hand. Those were obviously for me, and I could barely stop a sigh from escaping at the idea of even more paperwork. "What do you have for me, Mike?" I asked, hoping to get some interesting news and not just more forms to sign. Lowering the datapad in his right hand, he said while holding up 5 datapads in his left hand. "2 forms to sign, Mr. Dennebrun. 1 report on the last quarter. Those are the ones for the Alliance. The other 2 are a commission for more ODPs for the Alliance. It just needs your signature. And the other is a report on the ongoing projects." I had dreaded it would be just more paperwork. That it wasn't so put the first genuine smile of the day on my face. "Wonderful," I answered and pointed to a corner of my desk. "You can leave the reports and forms there, but I would like to hear the cliff notes about the projects." Mike nodded and said, "Of course, sir. What would you like to hear first?" For a moment, I closed my eyes, going over the projects currently developing, before I had another idea. "Before we start, was there any news from Anita? I didn't have the time to call her in the last week, and the connection to our outpost on the Citadel isn't as secure as I would like." "I haven't heard anything new, sir. As far as I know, she's still trying to delay the relay opening." The relay opening, or like many of us call it, the day the slavers come. For more than 6 months now, the Batarians were advocating to open the relays connecting their territory to ours. For trading only, of course. Utterly bullshit, in my opinion. The only thing the Batarians were interested in was enslaving people. Taking our people and giving us death was the only trade the Batarians would make. Thankfully, Anita had been on the Citadel when they made the proposal to the Council. She had been able to run interference, giving one reason after another why it could be a bad idea to open the relays into our territory. From telling that her government didn't give her the authority to make the decision by herself, to arguing that there could be more systems in the relay route between the territories of the Systems Alliance and the Batarian hegemony. The last one was one of her most effective arguments since it played on the fear of another Rachni War. Yet it would only be a matter of time until the Council decided in favor of the Batarian hegemony. Some would say it was because the Batarians were part of the Citadel, embassy and all, but that would only be part of the reason. The other half of the reason would be to keep humanity from growing too strong, too fast. If the Alliance grew strong enough to contend against any of the Council species, it could threaten the power of the Council. The only option in that case would be granting humanity a Council seat, but sharing their almost absolute power wasn't something they were keen on doing. After all, they kept everyone from gaining enough power for more than a millennium, and they wouldn't stop now. Let's hope Anita can delay them for a long time. But enough of that. What about the Skycar designs? Are they finished? Mike lifted his datapad and swiped the touchscreen to find the correct file. His eyes darted over the displayed information before he looked up and said, "The designs themselves are ready, the body and the interior both, but they are still analyzing the Skycars bought from the Citadel. The basic principles were easy to discover, but they are struggling to make them different enough so that nobody can claim that we stole their work." "Good," I answered. "When the Skycars are out on the market, I want nobody to be able to sue us. Have you seen the designs? How do they look to you?" "They are interesting. Some would say they are less aerodynamic than the standard ones. Slower as well, but they are eye-catching. And that is what we're going for. I think the limousine will be very popular among the rich. They are elegant from the outside, and their interior is comfortable and luxurious." "Good to know. I guess the designs are on the datapad?" I asked, lifting the datapad in questions up. "Yes, sir," answered Mike with a nod. "I will take a look at them later. And now that we're talking about designs anyway, did Dr. Hoshiyum send his designs for the new fighter?" "He did. You can find them on the datapad under the name F043241. Within a few seconds, I found the file and opened it, and the picture that greeted me made me almost laugh out loud. Still, a snicker escaped me nonetheless. "Sir?" questioned Mike with a raised eyebrow, not understanding what I was laughing about. "Did you ever see the movie Star Wars? The first ones, I mean," I asked him, which he answered with a shake of his head. "In the movie The Return of the Jedi, the third Star Wars movie, there appeared a starfighter called A-Wing, and Takahashi's design is heavily inspired by it. You can almost say he wanted to build it in real life. But it's a good design. He wouldn't have chosen it just for appearance's sake." I scrolled through the data, looking at the specifications of the starfighter. The estimated speed of the fighter was phenomenal, and its weapons would give anyone trouble. But what really impressed me was the fact that Takahashi had managed to include a small shield generator. It wouldn't hold against prolonged fire from other starfighters or Guardian lasers, and a single shot from any ship above a starfighter would rip it into shreds. But the shield could help save lives. With their speed, they would be out of danger in moments if they were hit at all. "How fast can the production start?" I asked, my eyes still glued to the displayed information. "If you sign off on it now, a month, give or take a week. Consider it signed off. I want the facilities ready as soon as possible." I also got a message from Admiral Wright. He wants to keep one dreadnought slot open for the future. Maybe he was taken by Takahashi's idea of a 2 kilometers dreadnought, an answer to the Asari's Destiny Ascension. "Any news on them?" It took Mike almost a minute to find the necessary file inside his datapad, a testament to how much information it held. The construction of one of them is at its halfway point, and for the other, it hasn't begun yet. "The materials are ready, but the workers were still waiting for the final okay," said Mike. "The number of materials should be enough," I mused, thinking about what to do. "Sent word that they will not build a dreadnought. Instead, send them the plans for the battlecruiser, Type DF-09. I will talk with Admiral Wright tomorrow about it. The Alliance already paid for a dreadnought. The price for an experimental battlecruiser should be around the same." "Yes, sir. I will also arrange that the excessive materials are redistributed." "That won't be necessary," I said, declining Mike's offer. "Someone else will take care of that. You will have to do too much to organize that." I smiled at him, telling him without words that I valued his work too much to waste his talents on such a task. The way he returned it with a shy and at the same time pleased smile let me know he understood what I was not saying. Yet that was only half the reason I didn't want him to handle the issue of redistributing the materials. He wasn't skilled and experienced enough to make them disappear from the books. Whenever such an opportunity arose that materials had to be redistributed, no matter if the chance came by coincidence or planning, I made sure to inform my contacts in the AIS to redirect a shipment or two to another shipyard. From there, it would take a few detours until it finally arrived at a storehouse no one knew, ready to be used for any project the AIS had. "If you would allow me the question, sir," asked Mike tentatively. "It's something I noticed about the starfighters." "Go on," I said, asking myself why he seemed so nervous. I looked over the designs myself, and I have to say the F-04 seems like a great starfighter. But to me, it seems like his strengths lay in harassing enemy forces or protecting our own ships from enemy fighters. Nothing in its armament specifications pretends to being able to damage even a frigate. "Ah, I understand. Well, the F-04 DOS, the A-Wing's job isn't to take on battleships, not even in groups. Their job is to make sure that enemy fighters can't do theirs and to escort out heavy hitters to their targets." "What heavy hitters are you talking about, sir?" "The YSS-10, a starfighter specially devised to damage battleships. In combination with F-04S, which will be equipped with rockets to disrupt the shielding of ships, they will be able to take out even heavy cruisers. The most common design of ships emphasizes the importance of kinetic shielding. For that reason, the hulls of the starships are weaker than our own. If a starship loses its shields, it becomes easy prey for everyone. The YSS-10 will be equipped even better than the F-04 to disrupt shielding. Furthermore, it will be able to reduce their hulls to nothing in 3 or 4 bombing runs. But if the disruption of shields is the most important thing, why should we even build the YSS-10? Shouldn't we concentrate on the F-04? Huntuan, asked Mike. The question was a good one. Why indeed? I had discussed the subject with Admiral Wright and Takahashi dozens of times, both not seeing the need for them as well. I couldn't very well tell them that we would probably need them against the Reapers. They would have looked at me like I had gone crazy. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became, at least to me. Every time the Reapers appeared and the civilizations of the galaxy fought, it was a fight of big guns against bigger guns. Naturally, the bigger ones won. But there were scenarios where those with the bigger guns lost, and that at times spectacularly. The best example would be the Death Star, one of the biggest guns in space that I knew of. And in the end, it was destroyed by a small starfighter. It had started as an idea to have more options available in a fight, but that idea quickly became the knife in our armory. Why try to cut through armor with a sword when you can stick a knife through the seams? Someone once said that space battles were like battles between armies on Earth when humans just started to use rifles to fight. Two sides, both standing in the open, trying to hit each other and not get hit in return. One may argue that the Solarians were fighting as I wanted us to, but in my opinion, they didn't. They fought like the Turians, battleship against battleship, or used a needle coated in poison, a single strike to bring everything down. The question is a good one, Mike, I started. I want us to have more options available. While the YSS-10's job is to take out battleships in close combat so that our ships are not in too much danger, they can also be used in atmospheric combat. They can easily be modified for air support to help our troops on the ground. I think I understand, sir. It's less because we need them than that the Alliance is still trying to figure out which tools we will need in the future and how our military doctrine should adapt, said Mike. If you want to see it that way, yes. We are still new to true space battles, and we don't really know what we need to pacify an enemy colony. But enough of that. How are our mining operations going? And did you hear anything about that absurd bill to prohibit the use of drones? Our survey teams found dozens of planets with enough resources to maintain the Alliance's growth for another decade or two. Furthermore, they found an enormous deposit of E0 on one of the moons in the Abraxas system. It's outside the relay network, so only our mining ships can go there. That's great, I said. Anything else? There is one thing, but I don't know what to make of it, said Mike confusedly. And what is it? I urged him to continue. The survey teams found remnants of some kind of superstructure. The first results from the carbon dating tell us that the ruins are around 150,000 years old, much older than anything that we found from the Protheans. The theory is that there were older civilizations around, and they ceased to exist as the Protheans did. Yet that can't be all, right? You wouldn't be so skeptical if it were just old ruins, I asked. No, not that alone, agreed Mike. It's the fact that deep surface scans revealed that it couldn't have been more than a small city, and it was the only one on the planet. The system hasn't been completely surveyed, but there were no signs of other ruins. Besides, there were EZO traces in the ruins, which led to the conjecture that they were a spacefaring species. Still nothing wrong with that. There have been probably dozens of galactic civilizations since the Big Bang. Probably hundreds, if not thousands, if you look at the number of Reapers. We have surveyed most of the star cluster, but have yet to find even a single secondary relay. That is what I don't understand. The only two possibilities are that this civilization either had something like the DR drive themselves, or that someone moved the relays away since we found no evidence to them being destroyed. That stopped me short. I didn't even entertain the possibility that this civilization invented something like the DR drive. The Reapers went to great lengths to make sure that the major civilizations of each cycle would find the remnants of their predecessors, and with them the Mass Effect technology and the relays. Humanity would have done the same if I hadn't intervened. Yet the thought that the Reapers would move the relays intrigued me. Why would they do something like that? The answer came to me like a hit to the head. The Reapers wanted civilizations to thrive so that they could harvest them one day. They would choose which species was to lead the new cycle and then place the relays in a way that would lead to the ruins of their predecessors and to the growing civilizations of their designated successors. At the same time, they would prevent that the ruins of older civilizations were found, stopping the questions of what happened to them, and that other species could evolve on planets far away from the relay network. That's truly interesting, I said slowly, my thoughts still on this matter. Have we found similar ruins somewhere else? Not that I know of, sir, but we haven't looked very closely either. There were some rumors a few years ago that something had been found in a system close to the Olympus system, but I don't know if it's true or not. Get someone to follow that rumor then. Find out if it's true, and if it is, start to look in the other systems close by, I ordered. I will contact some people as soon as possible. I had never considered the possibility that ruins of civilizations older than the Protheans still existed. I knew, of course, that even the Protheans learned from their predecessors, but didn't pay it any mind before. If we could find those older ruins, they could become a great benefit to the Alliance, since Citadel law stated that only Prothean ruins had to be shared among the Citadel species. There was no mention of other civilizations. To be sure, I would get a lawyer to look over that particular law to close all potential loopholes. And what about the bill? I asked, returning to the conversation at hand. The bill banning the use of autonomic drones had been a pain in the arse for me since it was brought up in a public discussion concerning the topic of artificial intelligence. One opinion was that the way how we use drones for construction, and especially mining with minimal user input, could be counted as a form of artificial intelligence. They droned on and on that if we didn't prohibit the use of drones, it could hurt our chances of joining the Citadel one day. Utter bullshit, in my opinion. They were at best highly sophisticated Vox, and nobody could tell me something different. The drones could not learn and evolve by themselves, and that was a sign of an AI. I quickly found out that the rumor, for that, was it and nothing else, had been spread by one of my business rivals that couldn't keep up with me as long as I used these drones. By the time I moved against him and showed my displeasure with his actions, the rumor had gained the attention of others, business and political enemies alike. Ever since then, I had done to crush any motion that could see my drones banned. Yet sometimes someone thought themselves clever to try again, just like now. But it would be stopped like always because I had a big bag of tricks, full of blackmail, threats, bribery, and favors owed. And I had one more trick, one of my favorites, one that I hated when it was used against me, but couldn't deny its effectiveness. The bill has been stopped before it could be even discussed more than once. We managed to bury them in so much red tape that it will take a year or two before anyone thinks about the bill again. Bureaucracy and paperwork. It's very effective when used correctly. Wonderful, I exclaimed, a smile spreading on my face, banishing the annoyance I felt whenever that topic was brought up. That should be all for today. Or is there something else that you would like to bring up, Mike? Not at the moment, sir. If you'll excuse me, I will start to contact some people. Not a moment after I did so, Mike was out of my office. And the moment the door closed with a hiss, I pushed a button on the underside of my desk. The door locked shut with a click, and a quiet humming echoed through that room. With a quick look at my Omni tool, I could see that all signals in and out of the room were blocked. I grabbed one of the data pads that displayed nothing more than a standard form for one thing or another. And while holding the flat of my hand on the display, I said, "Fac quod necess est." When I took my hand off the data pad, the display had changed. It didn't show a form anymore. Instead, it showed files upon files about the beginning research of Dr. Konstantin Schale. The good doctor had been truly a blessing, eccentric as hell, but just as talented and intelligent, and that was why I had given him a special task. Officially, he worked on gene mods for the Alliance military, nothing that would get us in trouble with the Citadel or our own population. Unofficially, he worked on the Orion Project, our very own super soldier program. Surgery, advanced gene modification, and experimental armor. Everything we needed to recreate the Spartan program from the Halo universe fell in his field of research. Of course, we wouldn't recreate the Spartan Twekus or Spartan 3s, but the IVs were definitely possible. The research would probably take decades, but it would help us to be prepared. After all, the galaxy might be peaceful right now, but to me, it felt like it was just the calm before the storm. How long we would be waiting for the storm wasn't something I knew, but he would come. Chapter 15. January 7th, 2164, 1829 Esset, Earth, Paris. If somebody told me I would think that radiant heaters were one of the best inventions ever, I would have called them a fool. Yet right at this moment, I would call it the truth and nothing else. While I had a preference for open-air parties, they should happen during summer, and not when there was snow dancing over the rooftops. Thankfully, the heaters kept the cold away from the guests and me, while a small mass effect field protected us from the harsh winds and snow. Still, if I ever got my hands on the organizer of this party, we would exchange some words that should not be repeated in polite company. Nonetheless, I had to admit that Michael's re-election party was a huge success. The party was sponsored by an old friend of Michael, the two of them trying to help people around the world since before we found the Prothean archives on Mars. That goal was still on their agenda. The only difference was that they didn't restrict themselves to only Earth anymore. Through donations and resettlement programs, they had helped the development of the colonies as much as they had helped reduce the effects of global warming. Even the entrance card for today's party was nothing more than a way to collect donations. I grabbed a champagne flute from one of the wandering waiters and turned my attention back to the conversation I had with a quite enthusiastic young woman. She was the niece of our political party's representative on the colony of Amaterasu, Claire Lodgens. Bright blonde hair with innocent blue eyes. Yet there was something in her eyes that shined brighter than her apparent youth. And that was the reason why I even entertained the idea of talking to her for more than a few minutes, to thank her for her presence at the party and her support. She may be still in the middle of getting her master's degree, but the idea she had and the groundwork she had already done were fascinating. "Could you please repeat that?" I requested. "I don't think I completely understood what you were saying." Claire smiled at me and started to explain to me once again. "The basis of my research lies in the application of the OmniTool interface in different ways. I want to find out how it could be applicable in VR technology." VR technology? As far as I know, they already use it on the Citadel, a battle simulation for civilian use. "I've heard that as well, checked it even on the extranet," Claire admitted, a small pout on her face at the fact that the idea she had was already made into reality by someone else. "But I've not found anything regarding the software or hardware behind it, and to buy the license to use it would probably cost a small fortune. That's why I want to discover it by myself. I'm already at the point where I can create a room full of plants and interact with them. People as well. Admittedly, they are nothing more than orange blocks at the moment, but that won't stay this way for long. Just think about the dozens of scenarios where we could use this technology. It doesn't have to be restricted to entertainment uses. For example, police forces could use it to scan and recreate a crime scene and then manipulate the recreation without compromising the actual scene. That is a good example. How realistic do you think can these simulations become?" I questioned further, a picture manifesting in my mind. "Well," Claire said, playing with a lock of hair while thinking about the answer, "that would depend on the computational power available. If we set the computational power as a constant, the amount of details is anti-proportional to the size of the simulation. Furthermore, the addition of movement would need computational power as well. But if we're only talking about details, it would be possible to see single hairs on a person's head. The applications of such a technology could be endless. The only restriction I could think of at this moment was the lack of imagination. Claire's idea of using it for police work was admirable, but I had another one, an idea that would possibly keep people alive. The most important thing that our military forces lacked wasn't cutting-edge gear or training. They needed something far more simple, namely experience. Different scenarios could be trained without any real danger to the soldiers, and the realism of the simulation would help them too. I wanted to continue the conversation and find out more about how Claire wanted to accomplish her idea, but I could see Michael approaching us from the corner of my eye. He looked like he wanted to talk to me, so I ended the conversation as politely as I could. "I'm sorry, miss, but it seems like the guest of honor wishes to have a word with me," I said, and took out a card from the inner pocket of my jacket and held it out for her. "Still, I would like to hear more of your idea at another time. Here's my card. Please call me when you finish your master's degree. Only a year left, right?" Claire took the card out of my hand with a dazed look and nodded absently. "I really like your work, and I would like to fund further research into the subject. Also, there are a lot of projects that could use someone like you." "I see a bright future ahead of you, Claire," I complimented with a smile. I patted her on the shoulder, and she looked up from the card in her trembling hands. Her bright blue eyes almost teared up when I finished and returned my smile shakily. With another nod, I left her and went to meet Meckel. He looked exhausted, and I noticed that the gray in his hair had become even more prevalent over the few months we hadn't seen each other. "Oscar, good to see you." "I didn't think you would make it," Michael greeted me, arms wide open to greet me with a hug. "You as well," I answered and hugged him. During the short moment we were close to each other, he whispered, "It's confirmed. Andrew briefed me shortly before I came here. There's one on Shanxi. No heads up." I clapped him twice on his back to signal I understood the message, and we parted again. "Come, Let's walk a moment. There's someone I want you to meet, said Michael, and started to walk without giving me a chance to reply. Somebody interesting? I asked, not knowing who he would introduce to me. Just someone who has been making huge donations lately. I think you know him actually, at least from the name. Not telling who? Nope, said Michael with an annoying smirk on his lips. Just from that, I already knew that I would probably hate the guy. How does it feel to become president once again? I asked to prevent any silence between us. Like the whole world just dropped onto my shoulders again. While I'm happy to be re-elected, I'm also glad that I have to do this job only for another 4 years. After that, I'll go on a long vacation. You on vacation? Yeah, but only for a year or two before you're bored and want to do something again, I commented. You're probably right. It's not in my nature to do nothing, agreed Michael jovially. Yet the smile on his face disappeared seconds later, replaced by a frown. I still get the feeling that we won this election too easily. The first one I could understand, but this one? He shook his head. There was no real pushback from the opposition during the campaign. I would have expected that the more xenophobic elements would put up a fight, but they were quiet as well, worryingly so. You still underestimate your own reputation, I said. As long as you're their opponent, they won't fight. To do so would be a battle lost before it began. But you're right, too. Terra Firma was pretty quiet during this campaign. They are probably preparing for the next election period to stir up trouble for us. Without you at the head, they will have an easier time. The political scene of the alliance could be divided into 3 parties if one wanted to make it easier to understand. On the one side was Terra Firma, the political party with the mindset of humanity first. They had the most people with xenophobic tendencies in their ranks. For the moment, they mostly preyed on people afraid of what aliens could mean for human society and the dangers associated with them. While they were currently just a small faction, at least in comparison to us, I knew that the moment the Batarians started to raid our colonies, they would gain a greater following and power. On the other side was the political party with the name Galactic Union. To call them xenophiles wasn't quite right, but it described the prevalent feeling of the party. They wanted to bind the alliance even tighter and faster to the Citadel and the Council than we already were. In their mind, humanity would only prosper if we followed the example of the other galactic civilizations. Malicious gossip has it that some of their members even wanted humanity to become a client state to one of the Council species. It was just a rumor, but somehow it was pretty persistent. The third party was us, Alliance Humanists. We were the so-called moderates of the Alliance, taking influences from the other 2 parties and making them our own. In essence, like the Galactic Union, we wanted to be closer to the Citadel, but at the same time stand on our own 2 feet, to be seen as equals by the other galactic civilizations. For now, we were the strongest political party, but I was under no illusion that it would stay this way forever. I fear the same thing, said Mahon, taking a sip from his champagne flute, especially since the Batarians convinced the Council to allow them to open the relays into our territory. It was only a matter of time, I replied. If the Council hadn't agreed, they would have opened the relays regardless of our protest, calling it the actions of pirates or other criminal elements. Nobody would have believed it, but to prove it would have been impossible. At least this way, Anita could get us the promise of an embassy in a few years' time. I'm still of the opinion that we should have taken the option to establish an embassy this year. And I'm still of the opinion that we can't move too fast, I argued. The other species waited for decades, some even for more than a century, to get an embassy on the Citadel. If we get one before even 10 years are over, since the first contact between us, it will lead to an even stronger resentment than it will already be. Michael suddenly stopped walking and took a deep breath. He then looked me in the eye, smiled, and said, I know, we had that discussion when the offer was made. Besides, Anita supported your point too, and she is our current expert on foreign relations. If you both think that this is the right choice, then I'm not stupid enough to not listen to you. Just let me have my own opinions. Can you do that for your president? I saw a glint of amusement in his eyes and decided to indulge him. With a flourish, I put my right hand over my heart, bowed respectfully, and said, Of course, Your Grace. Whatever you wish, Your Grace. I held my position for a moment, glancing up at Michael's face to see him holding back a peal of laughter. He was quite unsuccessful in his endeavor and snorted, which in turn got me to laugh as well. In the end, we had to be quite an amusing sight for the other guests, because I noticed after Michel and I had stopped laughing that they looked pretty entertained by us. "Now come, I don't want to keep the man waiting any longer," said Michel, tapping me on my shoulder, and started walking again. It took us no more than a minute to find the man that Michael wanted to introduce to me. "Ah, there you are," said Michel happily. As always, it was a pleasure to see how well Mikkel transitioned from genuine joy to fake delight. The shift was so seamless that most people didn't even notice it. It took me a while too, until I could spot the difference. The man in question turned around, and I got a good first look at him. He was in his 40s, maybe 50s, and took great care in his appearance. His hair and beard were black without any hair out of place, and his suit was a custom order in the newest style. The smirk he wore on his face spoke of arrogance and self-confidence that came from money and, in my opinion, the illusion of power. "Oscar, may I introduce you to Mr. Henry Lawson?" offered Michael, and I could see in his eyes that he would prefer not to deal with this man, but had no other choice than to do so. "Good evening, Mr. Lawson. I've heard a lot about you," I greeted him, holding my hand out for a shake. None of my words had been false. I had really heard about him, and not just from the games. Henry Lawson was a competitor in the starship building business with a minor shipyard to his name. But instead of building them for the Alliance or other companies, he almost exclusively built starships for his, by far more successful shipping business. Lawson Shipping was the company you hired when you either had to transport huge amounts of materials or something of extreme value. The smirk hadn't left Lawson's face, but it had become more strained the moment he realized who I was. Still, he took my hand and shook it with more pressure than was necessary or even polite. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Dennebrun," said Lawson, and I took an immediate dislike to his voice. If I had to describe how his voice sounded to me, I would say oily. "I'm sure," I answered, and increased the pressure of our handshake for a moment to show him that such juvenile tactics had no effect on me. "I have to say," I continued after we let go of each other, "I had not expected to see you here, Mr. Lawson. If I remember correctly, you're currently in an important phase of expanding your business into Citadel space, or am I wrong?" "No, you're not," he answered easily. "I'm currently expanding into Citadel space. My company already got a few contracts to that effect. I can afford to leave my affairs in the hands of some trusted people for the time being. After all, who in their right mind would ignore the chance to meet with the President of the Alliance?" "And I'm thankful that you're here, Henry," interjected Michael. "Your donation was truly generous and had been a great help during our campaign." "Think nothing of it, President Port," replied Lawson, crossing his arms behind his back. "You do good work out there, and everything that benefits the Alliance benefits humanity, too." "Yet I've heard troubling news," continued Lawson, and turned back to me. "Mr. Dennebrun, is it true that some of your mining operations came under attack by anti-AI activists? I've heard they were very angry that the reopening of the anti-drone bill had been denied by the courts. Do you even have enough time to take care of it, with your responsibility to the Alliance as the Minister of Economics?" His smirk was truly getting on my nerves, and I entertained the idea of hitting him in the face just to see another expression. "Sadly, what you've heard is true. There was an attack, destroying thousands of credits in material and equipment, but more importantly, killed some of my employees." I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. The day I got the news, I had been so enraged that I threw my chair across the office. It seemed the anger still hadn't left me entirely. "Yet you're also wrong. That wasn't an attack by anti-AI activists. Sure, they called themselves as such, but an investigation had revealed no connections to any of the other existing groups. This particular group didn't even exist before the attack. Furthermore, they were paid by someone for the attack. Their official designation is pirates, since they took with them what they could carry." I looked deeply into Henry Lawson's eyes and saw a small bit of fear at the tone my voice had changed into. The deep growl unnerved him, and I took a small bit of satisfaction in it. "Of course, as it is with all pirates, they will be hunted down, brought to justice, and we will find out who their associates are and do the same to them. It's being handled by the military and the AIS, so yes, I have enough time to take care of my duties as a minister." That's good to hear, Mr. Dennebrun, said Lawson and turned towards Michael. If you would excuse me, my flight is in 2 hours. I can't miss it. As Mr. Dennebrun already said, my company is currently in an important phase. Without waiting for our farewells, Lawson turned around and almost fled from the party. I couldn't help but smile satisfyingly at this. Did he have anything to do with the attack? Asked Michael as we watched how Lawson disappeared. After that display? I'm sure of it. Years ago, he tried to participate in the mining business. It was a small company and not very successful. I think he blames me for it since I bought it for almost nothing. And he's afraid that I take his shipyard away too. He's the kind of man to carry grudges for the smallest of things. I had that impression as well. What do you suggest we do? Take his donations, I said, as many as he wants to give. Bleed him dry if you want, just don't give him any actual power. He'll let that go to his head. And you take advantage of that on the business side, I guess? Do you take me for a fool? I asked with no heat behind my words. Michael understood what I was implying and smiled. A moment of silence passed between us, just looking at the place where Lawson had stood before Michael asked. I didn't know that the AIS was looking into it too. They don't? I answered with a smirk. I just said that, looking for a reaction. They have more important things to look into. January 7, 2165. 1932, set Shaanxi, classified. Matthew Avar, Alliance Intelligence Service. Matthew sighed as he leaned back from his camera. For a week, he had observed the individual in the apartment across the street. Even the knowledge of who he was observing didn't help to alleviate his boredom. No matter how important this job was, stakeouts were just plain boring. The only thing that did help was that his shift was coming to an end, and that he finally could take a well-deserved nap in the bedroom next door. He leaned back forward to look through the camera again, and he couldn't help but chuckle at the fact that he used such a primitive design by today's standards. Yet he couldn't deny the brilliance of the director for his idea to use older technology to trick counter-espionage activities. Hell, he heard from his mentor that some of the most secret information had been saved on diskettes that were almost 200 years old. The security on them might be shit, but who even had a device to read them anymore? Just like the camera Matthew was using, it was nothing more than a single-lens reflex camera with no signals to connect it to any device. In addition to that, several old-style directional microphones were pointed at the apartment and the Asari had rented. He checked the time and took another photo of her doing something with her Omni tool. Matthew didn't know what she was doing, and that wasn't part of his job anyway, only observing and reporting to another team when she left the apartment. A third team would run electronic interference if she tried to hack into any sensitive database. 3 years, that's how long he had been part of the AIS already. But sometimes he was still awed at how flawless they operated for such a young intelligence agency. Matthew had lived in one of the poorer districts in one of the cities along the east coast of South Africa for the first 10 years of his life. His father could barely provide enough for their family as a mechanic, while his mother had enough to do with taking care of him and his 2 siblings. Yet before he could tell his parents that he was ready to find a job to help them, representatives of the Alliance came with an offer for a new life in one of the newly founded colonies. Life would be hard and safety was not guaranteed, but the possibility for a better life existed. Not even a month later, Matthew and his family traveled the stars towards their new home. Like the representatives in ads had said, life was difficult and hard in the beginning, but it presented opportunities. His father found work quickly, and even his mother found a small-time job to help the family. But the best thing that happened, in Matthew's opinion, was that he could continue to go to school. He even got a scholarship for university from the Alliance with the stipulation that he would have to work for the Alliance for 5 years after he finished his education. When he heard that, he didn't even hesitate a second before agreeing to it. The moment he had entered high school, he had already decided to work for them. In his mind, he could do nothing else to repay the Alliance for the chance they gave to his family. During his time in college, a woman had met with him and explained that they were impressed with the results he had achieved and offered him a place in the newly created AIS when he finished. He took the offer after careful consideration, secretly excited about the possible adventure this could turn out to be. Matthew held back another sigh as he thought about his naive younger self. The work the AIS did was important. No question, but exciting? Most of his tasks were going over and compiling reports, and his fieldwork was restricted to stakeouts. That was the lot of a junior agent. Still, he was sure that with time more difficult and exciting missions would come his way, and this stakeout could be the prelude to that. He didn't know how exactly the Asari had been identified, but one thing was clear from his briefing. Do not underestimate her. After all, she was a Spectre. It took them 2 weeks to be sure of that, and one thing was clear by now. No official agency knew she was here, which was a direct violation of the agreement the Alliance had with the Citadel Council. There had been no orders to arrest her, just to keep her from sensitive information and observe her behavior. It wouldn't surprise Matthew if this would be kept quiet. The advantage of using this in backroom deals far outweighed the consequences of a public outcry. And while Matthew Avar might want an exciting life, he wasn't stupid. Still, he thought, maybe I'll get a mission to infiltrate the Citadel in the future.